So, workers and friends, welcome back to Working Class Revolt. As always, I have my great co-host, Australian labor organizer, union organizer, David Fox. How are you over there this lovely Sunday morning down in Australia, no?
Well, I'm good, actually. Very good, thank you. And good morning to everyone here in Australia and around the world. It is now just after 10 o'clock here, and it's a very cold morning too.
Right on, right on. Let's see. Tonight we're going to be listening to, I hope this works. I hope this works. This is new technology. I'm expanding my my abilities here. We're going to attempt to play the audio of Henry Wallace's speech, The Century of the Common Man, from 1942. A little bit of background. 1942 was, they're in the middle of the World War II. And it's not looking good. I mean, Nazis took over most of Europe, and it's a horrible time. But what came out of against this horrible enemy, an alliance arose. An alliance arose between the Soviet Union, the United States, England, France, to push back against the powers of fascism. The Soviet Union right before this, in the Great Depression, the Soviet Union, the economy was doing wonderfully. So the strength of the plan economy, the strength of the 5-year plans, the strength of socialism was showing the world a new push, a new future, electrifying the countryside, industrial growth at unprecedented rates, while the economy in the United States was on its downfall. And the capitalists in the United States were really worried about losing their place. Were really worried about losing power. So there was a bit of an alliance between Roosevelt and the Communist Party within the United States, the labor movement, which was largely led by the Communist Party in the United States, and the Soviet Union against the Nazis. And there was actually a Nazi attempt in the United States. It was the business plot to overthrow Roosevelt and install a tyrannical fascist regime in the United States. And there became this. So now, after the Cold War, when you go around here in the South and you talk about communism, and they're like, "That's un-American, boy. We're gonna get you. We don't want them commies around here." Well, back in the World War II, the communists were the ones leading the fight against the Nazis. Folk singers like Woody Guthrie. We're gonna break them Nazi chains. We're gonna tear the fascists down. And that was deeply American. America, the nation founded on slavery. America, the nation founded on the genocide against the indigenous population, was part of the coalition with the Soviet Union that was leading the way in the fight for workers to destroy the Nazis. And people say, well, why are you going to lift up the vice presidents of America with 3 Ks? And the thing is, I live in the United States, and I want America to be an anti-imperialist country. I want it to give up and destroy all forms of colonialism. Colonialism against the internal colonies of Afro-America, colonialism against our comrades in the Southwest, Chicanos and Aslan. And if we want to build that, we got to build with what's here. It ain't going to be no blueprint where we're gonna think, oh, this is the best communist society, and then we're just going to somehow magically take power and implement that shit. We got to look at things deep within the traditions here. The traditions we've been lied to, like the man behind me, John Brown, who risked everything to fight against the disgusting institution of slavery. Union organizers throughout the town who list live. I was just watching the movie Norma Ray, the heroic Union leader I met, Crystal Lee Sutton, and the fight in the Union fight in the South. And we got to learn about everything we can from American history and American culture to be able to take what is here and build towards a better future. And that is why we're going to listen to Henry Wallace and his speech at a time when the United States was allied with the Soviet Union. Comrade David Fox, is there anything you'd like to add before we play the rather long speech, but it's rather inspiring. I hope people stick around. It's about 30 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add to give a little bit of context before we start?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because even though this happened in the United States at the time with Henry Wallace, and some people might think, what's the relevance for here in Australia? Well, understand too, Australia in 1942, we were under a direct invasion from Imperial Japan. John Curtin became our Prime Minister after an independent member crossed the floor and gave a no confidence vote in Robert Menzies, who was actually keen, would have sold Australia out completely to the Japanese, going to form the Brisbane Line. I won't go into the whole complete history of that at the moment, which would have decimated us. And obviously, the communists at the time here in this country were organising united front against Japanese fascism, imperialism, along with supporting Nazi Germany as well. It was all part of the united front work, and I think we've got to understand too the importance of communist role in the respective countries around the world. I mean, it was communists in France that organised the French resistance. It was communists in Poland that organised the Polish resistance. It was those Soviets trapped behind Nazi lines that formed the partisan movements, and they're all around our respective countries. The role communists played. There was no collaboration. It was all about organising the people to beat fascism overall. That was a number one priority, and it had to be done. And we also have to give credit to China as well, their role in World War II. And I think for us in Australia here, we have a lot to be grateful for China, because over 20 million Chinese people lost their lives fighting Imperial Japan along the can, and also fighting Shanghai Czech as well. But without that, if the Japanese, without them giving their lives, Japan would have actually sent another million military personnel directly towards Australia. We would have stood no chance at all. So we do have a lot to be grateful for, and also be grateful for all the comrades around the world at that time who played a significant role in turning the fortunes of World War II around in favour of the people's favour, and against Nazi Germany, against Imperial Japan, against fascist Italy, and any other like-minded fascist power at the time. Thank you.
Unmuted a little early there. Without further ado, we're going to hear from the man himself, Vice President Henry Wallace, and his great and epic speak, Century of the Common Man. Please stick around and please listen to the entire speech notes. If you have the We Are City Builders, the Center for Political Innovation Political Manual, edited by Caleb Maupin. If you want, you can actually, there's a brief, I think there's a few sentence intro before he actually gets into the text. It is on page 165 in the We Are City Builders manual. And I'll go ahead and start. I'll follow along and take notes. And after the about half-hour speech or so that we're going to play here, hopefully it works via YouTube, we're going to go over the questions in here and have a little bit more discussion.
Yep, very good for that.
Especially to recognize those who are representing the 14 nations from Latin America.
I want to say to all who in a formal or an informal way represent most, if not all, of the free peoples of the world who are met here tonight, that we are meeting in the interests of the millions of all the nations who have freedom in their souls To my mind, this meeting has just one purpose: to let those millions in the other countries know that here in the United States are 130 million men, women, and children who are in this war to the finish. Our American people are utterly resolved to go on until they can strike the relentless blows that will assure a complete victory, and with it a new day for the lovers of freedom everywhere on this earth. This is a fight between a slave world and a free world. Just as in the United States in 1862, we could not remain half slave and half free, so in 1942 the world must make its decision for a complete victory one way or the other. As we begin the final stages of this fight to the death between the free world and the slave world, it is worthwhile to refresh our minds about the march of freedom for the common man. The idea of freedom, the freedom that we in the United States know and love so well, is derived from the Bible, with its extraordinary emphasis on the dignity of the individual. Democracy is the only true political expression of Christianity. The prophets of the Old Testament were the first to preach social justice. But that which was sensed by the prophets many centuries before Christ was not given complete and powerful political expression until our nation here in the United States was formed as a federal union a century and a half ago. Even then, the march of the common people had just begun. Most of them did not yet know how to read and write. There were no public schools. Men and women cannot be really free until they have plenty to eat and time and ability to read and think and talk things over. Down the years, the people of the United States have moved steadily forward in the practice of democracy. Through universal education, they can now read and write and form opinions of their own. They have learned and are still learning the art of production, how to make a living. They have learned and are still learning the art of self-government. If we were to measure freedom by standards of nutrition, education, and self-government, we might rank the United States and certain nations of Western Europe very high. But this would not be fair to other nations, where education has become widespread only in the last 20 years. In many nations a generation ago, 9 out of 10 of the people could not read or write. Russia, for example, was changed from an illiterate to a literate nation within one generation. And in the process, Russia's appreciation of freedom was tremendously increased. In China, the growth in education, in reading, and the ability of the people to read and write during the past 30 years has been matched by an increased interest in real liberty. Everywhere, reading and writing are accompanied by industrial progress. And industrial progress, sooner or later, inevitably brings a strong labor movement. From a long time and fundamental point of view, there are no backward peoples which are lacking in mechanical sense. Russians, Chinese, and the Indians, both of India and the Americas, all learned to read and write and operate machines just as well as your children or my children. Everywhere the common people are on the march. By the millions they are learning to read and write, learning to think together, learning to use tools. They are learning to think and work together in labor movements, some of which may be extreme or a little impractical at first, but which eventually will settle down to serve effectively the interests of the common man. When the freedom-loving people march, when the farmers have an opportunity to buy land at reasonable prices and sell the produce of their land through their own organizations, when workers have the opportunity to form unions and bargain through them collectively, and when the children of all the people have an opportunity to attend schools which teach them the truth of the real world, when these opportunities are open to everyone, then the world moves straight ahead. But in countries where the ability to read and write has been recently acquired, and mind you, 62% of the people of the world today do not yet know how to read and write. But in those countries where the ability has been recently acquired, or where the people have had no long experience in governing themselves on the basis of their own thinking, it is easy for demagogues to arise and prostitute the mind of the common man to their own base end. Such a demagogue may get financial help from some person of wealth who is unaware of what the end result will be. With this backing, the demagogue may dominate the minds of the people, and from whatever degree of freedom they have, lead them back into a most degraded slavery. Herr Thyssen, the wealthy German steel man, little realized what he was doing when he gave Hitler enough money to enable him to play on the minds of the German people. The demagogue is the curse of the modern world. And of all the demagogues, the worst are those financed by well-meaning, wealthy men who sincerely believe that their wealth is likely to be safer if they can hire men with political it to change the signposts and lure the people back into slavery. Unfortunately for the wealthy men who finance movements of this sort, as well as for the people themselves, the successful demagogue is a powerful genie who, when once let out of his bottle, refuses to obey anyone's command. As long as his spell holds, he defies God himself, and Satan is turned loose on the world. Through the leaders of the Nazi Revolution, Satan is now trying to lead the common man of the whole world back into slavery and darkness. For the stark truth is that the violence preached by the Nazis is the devil's own religion of darkness. So also is the doctrine that one race or one class is by heredity superior, and that all other races or classes are supposed to be slaves. The belief in one Satan-inspired Führer with his Quislings, his Lavals, his Mussolinis, his Gauleiters in every nation in the world is the last and ultimate darkness. Is there any hell hotter than that of being a Quisling, unless it is that of being a Laval or a Mussolini? In a twisted sense, there is something almost great in the figure of the supreme devil operating through a human form, in a Hitler who has the daring to spit straight into the eye of God and man. But the Nazi system has a heroic position for only one leader. By definition, only one person is allowed to retain full sovereignty over his own soul. All the rest are stooges. They are stooges who have been mentally and politically degraded, and who feel that they can get square with the world only by mentally and politically degrading other people. These stooges are really psychopathic cases. Satan has turned loose upon us the insane.
I muted it very quickly, comrades. If someone could get in the text and say whether or not the audio is working on their end, that would be great. But if you look if you're following along in the Center for Political Innovation handbook, there is a picture here. I believe it's a presidential picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Henry Wallace. I believe it's a re-election poster. And there's a quick small paragraph by the editor that I wanted to read that gives a little bit more background on it. All right, good. Thank you, Matthew, for putting out there the audio is working. I just wanted to read this quick note from the editor around this picture before we continue on with the speech. In the late 1930s, a fight inside the ruling class forced the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Vice President Henry Wallace to enter an strategic alliance with labor unions, the Communist Party, and the Soviet Union. As a result, many progressive reforms were passed into law, and the Nazis were defeated in the Second World War. We'll continue on with the speech.
The search of the freedom, the march of freedom of the past 150 years has been a long, drawn-out people's revolution. In this great revolution of the people, there were the American Revolution of 1775, the French Revolution of 1792, the Latin American revolutions of the Bolivarian era, the German Revolution of 1848 and the Russian Revolution of 1918. Each spoke for the common man in terms of blood on the battlefield. Some went to excess. But the significant thing is that the people groped their way to the light. More of them learned to think and work together. The People's Revolution aims at peace and not at violence. But if the rights of the common man are attacked, it unleashes the ferocity of the she-bear who has lost a cub. When the Nazi psychologists tell their master Hitler that we in the United States may be able to produce hundreds of thousands of planes, but that we have no will to fight, they are only fooling themselves and him. The truth is that when the rights of the American people are transgressed, as these rights have been transgressed, the American people will fight with a relentless fury which will drive the ancient Teutonic gods back cowering into their caves. The Götterdämmerung has come for Odin and his crew. The people are on the march toward an even fuller freedom than the most fortunate peoples of the world have hitherto enjoyed. No Nazi counter-revolution will stop it. The common man will smoke the Hitler stooges out into the open in the United States, in Latin America, in India. He will destroy their influence. No Lavals, no Mussolinis will be tolerated in a free world. The people in their millennial and revolutionary march toward manifesting here on earth the dignity that is in every human soul hold as their credo the four freedoms enunciated by President Roosevelt in his message to Congress on January 6, 1941. These four freedoms are the very core of the revolution for which the United Nations have taken their stand. We who live in the United States may think there is nothing very revolutionary about freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and freedom from fear, freedom from the secret police. But when we begin to think about the significance of freedom from want for the average man, then we know that the revolution of the past 150 years has not been completed, either here in the United States or any place else in the world. We know that this revolution cannot stop until freedom from want has actually been attained. And now, as we move forward toward realizing the four freedoms of this people's revolution, I would like to speak about four duties. It is my belief that every freedom, every right, every privilege has its price, its corresponding duty, without which it cannot be enjoyed. The four duties of the people's revolution, as I see them as of this day, are these. One, the duty to produce to the limit. Two, the duty to transport as rapidly as possible to the line of battle. Three, the duty to fight with all that is in us. And four, the duty to build a peace just, charitable, and enduring. The fourth duty is that which inspires the other three. We failed in our job after World War I. We did not know how to go about it to build an enduring worldwide peace. We did not have the nerve to follow through and prevent Germany from rearming. We did not insist that she learn war no more. We did not build a peace treaty on the fundamental doctrine of the people's revolution. We did not strive wholeheartedly to create a world where there could be freedom from want for all the peoples. But by our very errors, we learned much, and after this war, we shall be in position to utilize our knowledge in building a world which is economically, politically, and I hope spiritually sound. Modern science, which is a byproduct and essential part of the people's revolution, has made it technologically possible to see that all the people of the world get enough to eat. Half in fun, half seriously, I said the other day to Madame Litvinov, the object of this war is to make it sure that everyone can have a quart of milk to drink every day. And she said, yes, even half a pint. The peace must mean a better standard of living for the common man, not merely in the United States and England, but also in India, Russia, China, and Latin America, not merely in the United Nations, but also in Germany, Italy, and Japan. Some have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering, the century which will come into being after this war, can be and must be the century of the common man. Perhaps it will be America's opportunity to support the freedom and duties by which the common man must live. Everywhere the common man must learn to build his own industry with his own hands in practical fashion. Everywhere the common man must learn to increase his productivity so that he and his children can eventually pay to the world community all that they have received. No nation will have the God-given right to exploit other nations. Older nations will have the privilege to help younger nations get started on the path to industrialization. But there must be neither military nor economic imperialism. The methods of the 19th century will not work in the people's century, which is now about to begin. India, China, and Latin America have a tremendous stake in the people's century. As their masses learn to read and write, and as they become productive mechanics, their standard of living will double and treble. Modern science, when devoted wholeheartedly to the general welfare, has in it potentialities of which we do not yet dream. And modern science must be released from German slavery. International cartels that serve American greed and German will to power must go. Cartels in the peace to come must be subjected to international control for the common man, as well as being under adequate control by the respective home governments. In this way, we can prevent the Germans from again building a war machine while we sleep. With international monopoly pools under control, it will be possible for inventions to serve all the people instead of only the few. Yes, and when the time of peace comes, the citizen will again have a duty. The consumer will have a duty. The supreme duty of sacrificing the lesser interest for the greater interest of the general welfare. Those who write the peace must think of the whole world. There can be no privileged peoples. We ourselves in the United States are no more a master race than the Nazis. And we cannot perpetuate economic warfare without planting the seeds of military warfare. We must use our power at the peace table to build an economic peace that is charitable and enduring. If we really believe that we are fighting for a people's peace, all the rest becomes easy. Production, yes, it'll be easy to get production without either strikes or sabotage. Production with a wholehearted cooperation between willing arms and keen brains. Enthusiasm, zip, energy, geared to the tempo of keeping everlastingly at it day after day. Hitler knows as well as those of us who sit in on the War Production Board meetings that we here in the United States are winning the battle of production. He knows that both labor and business in the United States are doing a most remarkable job, and that his only hope is to crash through to a complete victory sometime during the next 6 months. Then there's a task of transportation to the line of battle by truck and railroad car and ship. We shall joyously deny ourselves so that our transportation system is improved by at least 30%.
I'm not sure what happened. It just quit on us. Yeah, I'll get it back up and running. There we go.
And there will have to be some denying, and you're going to hear plenty about it. I need say little about the duty to fight. Some people declare, and Hitler believes, that the American people have grown soft in the last generation. Hitler agents continually preach in South America that we are cowards, unable to use, like the brave German soldiers, the weapons of modern war. It is true that American youth hates war with a holy hatred. But because of that fact, and because Hitler and the German people stand as the very symbol of war, we shall fight with a tireless enthusiasm until war and the possibility of war have been removed from this planet. We shall cleanse the plague spot of Europe, which is Hitler's Germany, not the real Germany, and with it the hellhole of Asia, which is Japan. The American people have always had guts and always will have. You know the story of bomber pilot Dixon and radio man Gene Aldrich and ordnance man Tony Pastula. The story which Americans will be telling their children for generations to come as an illustration of man's ability to master any fate. These men lived for 34 days in the open sea in a rubber life raft, 8 feet by 4 feet. No food but that which they took from the sea and air with one pocket knife and a pistol. And yet they lived it through and came at last to the beach of an island they did not know. In spite of their suffering, they stood like men with no weapon left to protect themselves, no shoes on their feet or clothes on their back, and walked in military file because they said, if there were Japs, we didn't want to be crawling. The American fighting man and all the fighting men of the United Nations will need to summon all their courage during the next few months. I am convinced that the summer and fall of 1942 will be a time of supreme crisis for all of us. Hitler, like the prize fighter, who realizes that he is on the verge of being knocked out, is gathering all his remaining forces for one last desperate blow. There is abject fear in the heart of the madman and a growing discontent among his people as he prepares for his last all-out offensive. We may be sure that Hitler and Japan will cooperate to do the unexpected. Perhaps an attack by Japan against Alaska and our northwest coast, at the time when German transport planes will be shuttled across from Dakar to furnish leadership and stiffening to a German uprising in Latin America. In any event, the psychological and sabotage offensive in the United States and Latin America will be timed to coincide with or anticipate by a few weeks the height of the military offensive. We must be especially prepared to stifle the fifth columnists in the United States. Who will try to sabotage not merely our war material plants, but even more important, infinitely more important, our minds. We must be prepared for the worst kind of fifth column work in Latin America, much of it operating through the agency of governments with which the United States at present is at peace. When I say this, I recognize that the peoples, both of Latin America and of the nations supporting the agencies through which the fifth columnists work, are overwhelmingly on the side of the democracies. We must expect the offensive against us on the military, propaganda, and sabotage fronts, both in the United States and Latin America, to reach its apex sometime during the next few months, the convulsive efforts of the dying madman will be so great that some of us may be deceived into thinking that the situation is bad at the very time when it is really getting better. But in the case of most of us, the events of the next few months, disturbing though they may be, will only increase our will to bring about complete victory in this war of liberation. Prepared in spirit, we cannot be surprised. Psychological terrorism will fall flat. As we nerve ourselves for the supreme effort in this hemisphere, we must not forget the sublime heroism of the oppressed in Europe and Asia, whether it be in the mountains of Yugoslavia, the factories of Czechoslovakia and France, the farms of Poland, Denmark, Holland, and Belgium, among the seamen of Norway, or in the occupied areas of China and the Dutch East Indies. Everywhere the soul of man is letting the tyrant know that slavery of the body does not end resistance. There can be no half measures. North, south, east, west, and Middle West. The will of the American people is for complete victory. No compromise with Satan is possible. We shall not rest until the victims under the Nazi and Japanese yoke are freed. We shall fight for a complete peace as well as a complete victory. The people's revolution is on the march, and the devil and all his angels cannot prevail against it. They cannot prevail, for on the side of the people is the Lord. He giveth power to the faint. To them that have no might, he increaseth strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. Strong in the strength of the Lord, we who fight in the people's cause will never stop until that cause is won.
Okay, comrades, that was Henry Wallace's speech, The Century of the Common Man. I'm going to move a few things around on screen. Hide. There we are. And we're going to have a discussion about this. Comrade David Fox, is your audio working?
Yes, it is. I can hear you loud and clear.
All right. We're going to get, if you are following along in the CPI study manual, we are now on page 174, and we're going to be going over the questions. David Fox. Now let me take the first one. Let me go ahead and take the first one. Questions and study for discussion. Why did Henry Wallace place the American Revolution, the German Revolution, the Bolivarian Revolutions, and the Bolshevik Revolution in the same category? I mean, there's no denying this. I mean, the fight against feudalism and the revolutions that uprooted feudalism were the American Revolution. Arguably, it was just a transfer of power from the royalty and the British capitalists to the new banking interest. George Washington was banking interest, but even that, and there's a lot of argument that that was negative, and I think there's some Eurocentric viewpoints in that. Overall, replacing replacing feudalism with capitalism, even banking capitalist, imperialist capitalists, or the emergence of capitalism was a step forward. The absolute drudgery and disgustingness, which is feudalism. And the American Revolution, the German Revolution actually took place right after, I believe the one he's talking about was the one that took place right after World War I, which put social democrats into power. Hitler came out of that after the failure of the Social Democrats, but it was it overthrew the Kaiser, and then we have the Bolivarian revolutions, which is the great Simón Bolívar, the same people that are great comrades in Latin America, Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro today, claim the name of the great Simón Bolívar, who wanted America Unida, United America, to stand on its own and have its own dignity against the imperialists of North America, the United States. And the Bolshevik Revolution, the overthrowing of if you read Foundations of Lenin, it had the worst elements of feudalism, capitalism, imperialism all in one country. And because of that, it was pregnant with revolution. And that began the first communist, the first socialist revolution, first large-scale socialist semi-industrialized revolution in the world. And how crazy is it to hear an American vice president say this? We can't even have Bernie Sanders go on say, the Cubans had a good literacy program, without being attacked by every single other, Democratic candidate on stage for being a communist and openly being red baited. We have someone praising the Bolivian revolutions, the German Social Democratic Revolution, the Great Russian Revolution, and an American vice president praising the Soviet Union. And and he's right. He's right. These were all positive revolutions that brought the common man, that took the common man somewhat out from slavery, took him out of the slavery which was feudalism. And pushed him forward towards social justice, freedom, and rights. And it's amazing, how revolutionary the speech sounds. I mean, there's definitely a lot of problems with it. I think there was a part purposely left out by the editors, which had some particularly nasty phrases towards the Japanese. The Japanese were put in Japanese Americans who were born here and had nothing to do with the war were put in concentration camps, effectively. And I believe the editor purposely took out a small section of that was particularly grotesque. So this is definitely a document we're going to criticize, but at the same time, it is amazing to hear today, after the Cold War, after the McCarthy era, to have a U.S. vice president openly praising the Soviet Union and others. Comrade David Fox.
Well, I think with the first question here regarding what do you place all those revolutions in the same category? Well, I think it was seen in a sense, well, let's look at what the definition of revolution is. And it's a change of system, moving from an older system to a newer system or to a higher level system. There's a dictionary definition, but if you want to use that, but that's what it means. It's moving clockwise forward from one stage to the next, and that's what happened in all those revolutions. American Revolution obviously fought against the British Empire and formed its own independence. So it was that was moving to a next stage. And also the German Revolution, overthrowing the feudal aristocracy and forming a German nation. that was it. And so on and so on. The Bolivarian revolutions and the Bolshevik revolutions will say no more. I don't need to preach to some of the converted about that, but that's important to understand why he kept that in that particular context. For those of us who understand what a revolution is, it's moving one placing one system with another, and that's what exactly happened in those revolutions. And were any of those systems completely perfect, like the American Revolution, the German Revolution? Certainly not, but there was certainly an advancement forward in the right direction in that particular time and era. And yeah, so it's always keep that always keep that in the mind. That's why it was probably putting that into that same category.
Comrade, if you want to read and answer the next question.
Okay. Next question is Wallace correct in linking these various revolutions with each other? Does this tell us something about Wallace and the coalition he is speaking to? Well, I answered that first part of that second question in such a way, linking with them each other in the description of they were actually steps forward in the right direction with our advancements in human progress. Moving from one economic system to the other, to a higher level of economic system. And I think that's vitally important. As I said, keep that always in the back of your mind. The second question is very interesting and challenging. Does this tell us something about Wallace and the coalitions he is speaking to? Well, I think that's what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to actually come across from every progressive-minded person, so not just communist, but to any freedom-loving person in general, and basically building on the United Front work that the communists started out with in the 1930s against fascism. So it's really calling against, again, a united front. We're all in this together. We've all got the one goal to do, and to overthrow the backward regime of Nazi Germany. The Nazi regime of Germany, sorry. And so it's something I think that's what he was trying to do, is speaking to a coalition as broad as possible. And it's not just people political, it could be union as well, to general, like small farmers, small businesses. It's appealing to quite a broad audience. This further goes on into the using Christian terminology, but he was appealing to the broad masses of the people everywhere in the United States, especially, but from around the world, the importance of why we have to defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan too.
Let's see if definitely is Wallace correct and linking these various revolutions with each other? Yes, absolutely yes. Does this tell us something about the Wallace and the coalition he is speaking to? Yes. Think about it. Specifically our parents and Comrade Fox are so conditioned by the Cold War era, especially folks in the United States, the McCarthyist era, that communism is the most evil, disgusting thing. It's against God. It's against that. It's against this. And here's a man linking Soviet Soviet imagery with imagery from the Bible to line up and to really form the coalition between the Soviet Union, the people of the Soviet Union, and the people and the United States, who are in a real physical material coalition. We talk about the advancing production as quickly as possible. We have women on the workforce. We have African Americans, more industrialized settings, producing the machinery of war, working in concert with each other in cooperation to defeat the Nazis in further cooperation with the Soviet Union. It was hard times and it was hell times, but it was also a huge time of coming together to avert a grave crisis. I think I'll move on to the next question. Is Henry Wallace condescending in the way he speaks of the developing countries? Yes, he is absolutely condescending. There is a lot of American exceptionalism coming out of this. I think he's using American exceptionalism that's usually used for imperialist purposes. But transitioning it to but pushing to defeat the Nazis. At the same time, he attacks American exceptionalism somewhat in here as well, where he talks about how I think there's a section in here where he's basically saying it's not fair. If I could find it. If we measure the standards of freedom, I'll read this. If we were to measure the freedom by standards of nutrition, education, and self-governance, we might rank the United States and certain nations of Europe, Western Europe, very high. But this would not be fair to the other nations where education has become widespread only in the last 20 years. And many nations a generation ago, 9 out of 10 of these people could not read or write. Russia, for example, was changed from an illiterate to a literate nation within one generation. In the process, Russia's appreciation of freedom was tremendously increased. In China, the growth of education, reading, and the ability of the people to read and write during the 30 years with maths and increased. And he also goes on to talk about, I think it's here. Okay, I'll just continue. Everywhere, reading and writing are accompanied by industrial progress. And industrial progress sooner or later inevitably brings a strong labor movement. From a long time and fundamental point of view, there are no backwards people. There are no backwards people which are lacking in mechanical sense. Russians, Chinese, and Indians, both of India and the Americas, all learn to read and write, operate machinery just as well as your children and my children. So there's a huge kick at the racism of American exceptionalism. But at the same time, he's also saying that this democracy and stuff exists here. But at the same time, I kind of feel like if you read this part, these were some of the parts that kind of got to me. If you read the part where he says, some of which may be extreme or a little impractical at first. He's talking about the Chinese Revolution. He's talking about the Russian Revolution. He says extreme or little impractical at first. And then again on page 167, he says some went to excess. He's talking about the Russian Revolution. So he just said that, you can't be racist. You can't be like, oh, these people aren't going to have anything. If they're educated, if they get this, then they will be like us, which is condescending. But then when you throw into it, when China does have a revolution, when Russia does have a resolution, oh, they went to some excesses. Oh, they were a little extreme or impractical. Well, we know as communists, if you go deeper and lower in the working class, they're against extreme injustices. There is extreme measures that need to be taken in those situations. And I think that is somewhat condescending, but it's also anti-racist. So in this united front, I think there's a lot of parallels between, Henry Wallace and Bernie Sanders. I would say Henry Wallace is definitely the better of the two, specifically in this really disgusting imperialist era. I would call Bernie Sanders an imperialist, but I could see communists uniting. There was some anti-imperialist statements which Henry Wallace said, and I could definitely see, more progressive anti-imperialist united with communist anti-imperialists. I definitely think there's an overlap, and I think there is some condescension. You can't, when you're looking at historical documents, you're especially looking at, the United States, you got to understand that history and know what that history is. And we're going to call people we feel, inspired by, or even people we look up to, or even people we would hope would have been more powerful in that situation. We got to call them out for what we are and be real about it. What do you think, David Fox?
Well, it's interesting you been pointing out, and I have to tend to agree. Was he condescending in the way he speaks of developing countries? Certainly, yes, because I think there's And it's still quite alive and prevalent now, in the sense where a lot of people view a lot of developing countries being, I know, yes, Africa was not included in this, but there was have a look at developing natures and how we think of what liberty and justice and what social justice and all that is on those particular countries, and what's interesting, how we impose it, how we're trying to impose that on the rest of the world. Even back then, in some of those elements in the speech, that was his view. He was thinking, no, like, the Western English-speaking world, if you want to put it that way, or the Western speaking English, their way, their idea of justice and peace and everything is the correct way. And the thing is, it's not just been Henry Wallace was born that way, or anyone was like that in the first place. It was about a good 3 centuries of that behind it. It actually originally came from the English Enlightenment of the 1600s, which helped to overthrow the feudal order and establish a parliamentary type of democracy, as we currently know it today. And the fact is, they wanted to actually enlighten everyone with this Britishness everywhere, not just England, but Scotland was just as involved along with Wales. And this is where this all stemmed from. So wherever we go around the world, we want to uplift you, but in our mold, in our model. And that's what I'm where I'm looking at it from that view. And I think, okay, that's what I mean by condescending. Yes, he was correct. There were some places downtrodden, their literacy rates are high, etc., etc. But the fact is, at the end of the day, it's also too imposing that type of enlightenment on the people. Well, we're also here to enlighten everyone around the world, and it's not funny really, because it was devastating on a lot of cultures and that. And so it's part of that. Yes, it is condescending, and we sort of need to keep in the back of the mind we're reading it. And also, I just want to add to, we just got to keep sometimes things in context, the language of the times as well. That's what they did, and it was a bit condescending back then as well. So just keep that in the language of that particular era. Okay, back to you.
Okay, Comrade, if you want to take the next question.
Okay, I'll start that again. Is Wallace's assessment of the origins of fascism correct? I would say yes, to a certain degree. Obviously, he didn't get into the root cause of what gives rise to complete fascism, but he certainly touched on it. I think actually what he correctly pointed out, and what he was alluding to, what fascism is. Fascism equals slavery, it equals death. And it's certainly that part I would tend to agree with. I know we're talking to a lot of the converted here to understand what the origins of fascism and how it comes about. But certainly his description of it in that form at that time was certainly correct. I think it actually took a lot more of the the Marx-Leninist, the historical and dialectical materialism applying to how fascism comes into being, and I think that's something that sort of glosses right over that as well. But comparing to the brute force terror, or I'll rephrase that. It's a force of brute, as a movement of brute force and terror. He certainly is right on the point about that as well, and how dictatorial it is as well. It's basically one supreme being, basically looking over. That's the person who accentuates the power and imposing their will on others. He certainly got all that in the place. But it was interesting, and he was mentioning about Thyssen. Thyssen, founder of the Thyssen Group, which is still around today. And he says that Thyssen, the wealthy German, little realised what he was doing when he gave Hitler enough money to enable him to play in the minds of the German people. Well, fact is, a little bit interesting. I don't know why he came to that conclusion, because the fact is they consciously backed Hitler. A lot of the German financiers. Simple reason, because their class position was under threat. They know full well they got a bad revolution in Germany, so to actually clamp everything down, they had to get behind Hitler and the Nazis to make sure they obtain their class position in society, to stabilise it, to stabilise their position and stabilise imperial capitalist rule in Germany through brute force and terror. And the other thing as well, I mean, he did mention, although he did talk about the fifth column later on, that's another question, but it was also too international finance getting also funding the Nazis as well, because without all that, with German or other international finance backing of the Nazis, Hitler wouldn't have come to power, not only the Nazis. It would have been still a continuation, or someone else would have. But they realised, you know, they were under a dire threat. Their class position was under dire threat, so they, by rights, got behind Hitler and backed him.
Right, I think you're absolutely right. So, is Wallace's assessment of the origins of fascism correct? I would say he's half right. He's making this really progressive liberal argument that you know, demagogy comes out of poverty, which is true. It comes out of poverty. It comes out of despair. But it really doesn't get, you know, and I really like how you brought up how, the capitalists didn't realize what they were doing. The capitalists definitely realized what they're doing. The reason why fascism comes into existence is to save capitalism. And you don't want to say that because he's a backer. Henry Wallace backs capitalism. He backs a capitalism that's that's in solidarity with the Soviet Union against Hitler, but he's still backing capitalism. Nazis, fascism, it protects capital. It is a mobilization of the masses, of violence to protect the capitalist system. And you know, Henry Wallace isn't going to say that. We know that is scientific socialist. And I think that really gets into who are the ones that actually, you know, in this century or in the last century, who were the ones that actually combated illiteracy? Well, if fascism's come out of illiteracy, he says it himself that it was the Soviet Union. It had one of the quickest literacy programs and educational systems in the world. We also look at Cuba. We look at China. And we see who stands against, and I think that's beautiful because nowadays the anti-communists like to go around saying, you know, these places are demagogues, you know, Maduro's a tyrant, you know, Evo Morales is somehow undemocratic. China is, you know, the racist stereotype of the Asian despot. And it's supposed to come out of, you know, lack of literacy. But the first thing these countries did was make their populations literate so they could grow their industry and raise the people out of poverty, create better conditions. And they often, communist and socialist countries often had, when it came to the workplace, when it came to the central body, the central governing body, socialist and communist countries have been more democratic in many ways, because the average rank and file member of the Communist Party in China, I would say, would have far more say over the larger decisions of the democratic body, the central body, than, you know, the rank and file workers of the Democrats and Republicans here in the United States. I think when when we get told these right-wing anti-communist bullshit, even liberals will say this stuff. We can point out, well, did you like Henry Wallace? This is what he had to say about the Soviet Union, about literacy programs, etc. Let's see. I guess I'll go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, just also too with that question, he's also incorrect on page 167 on the very bottom of the page. He goes, through the leaders of the Nazi revolution, Satan is now trying to lead the common man of the whole world back into slavery and darkness. Well, there's two parts. So that first part of the question, I think he's completely incorrect there. It wasn't a Nazi revolution. I think we've just been, we talked about that before. In fact, what happens, fascism or Nazi, they want to actually take people back to a feudal slave society, basically. It was, you could use the term counter-revolution, a massive leap backwards, not a step forward in any direction. So, because it is a backward ideology. It certainly is. It's a destructive ideology. that causes untold suffering on millions and millions of ordinary working people. So, but yeah, just so I would actually just highlight that as well. So if anyone does obtain this book, yeah, it's on the bottom of page 167. So when we mentioned that, I think that's incorrect. And also too about fascism, I think he has a backer of capitalism. So he wants to say that fascism is a completely different system from what it really true from a completely different system from capitalism. It's not. Fascism is capitalism in its most brutal terrorist dictatorship form. We all know that. So. And he would not highlight that, even if it was told to him. He probably still would not advertise that for some very obvious reasons. All right.
Who did you do the last question? I think I should go on to the next question. Let's see. Why does Henry Wallace mix Marxian language with religious imagery? I think that's absolutely. I think that's very important. That's very important. So, I mean, it talked about the coalition between the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States was deeply religious, is still deeply religious. And there is still a lot of deeply religious people all over the world. And if we're going to be real communists and socialists, our power comes from the people. Our power comes out of the workers and the oppressed nations that are dissatisfied with the system and want a new system. And it is the masses that make history. And it is the masses that will decide the fight for that new system. And it is us as communists and revolutionaries it's simply to be effective. George Wallace was a social a very progressive and arguably anti-racist and even anti-imperialist progressive. Henry Wallace, but he is simply being effective. And communists today, with this very anti-religious zeal, tend to come off as condescending, tend to come off as elitist, and tend to alienate the working class. We should use the language of the people so that people can come to terms with Marxism on their own fruition for their own material benefit. Comrade Fox.
Well, and that's correct, especially if you've got a lot of a very big chunk of society that's deeply religious. So that would be the language they would understand. And this has always been a challenge for a lot of people, a lot of scientific socialists, to explain things in common terms to people understand within their own language. And hence why I get that, why you had to mix all that up together and use those religious overtones. I think that's why bodily to always keep that in the back of my mind. So he wasn't trying to convert all of us here to by any means at all, but that was just the importance of keeping our language simple as well. Well, not be a simpleton, but mind you, it's easy for people to understand. They get that because we can get caught up in our own language, our own terminology, etc. And a classic example, actually, if you do read Georgy Dimitrov's book Against War and Fascism, a classic point he did make out. It's there was during the 1930s, I think early 30s, there was a debate or a talk between someone who was in the Nazi Party and someone who was in the Communist Party towards a large gathering of people. And basically, the guy in the Nazi Party, all the members said, we will, round up all those who've been rorting the system, and we will throw them in prison, and it really playing on people's, fears, but also, their concerns as well. Yeah, we sure. We should arrest that banker down the road who's been ripping us off, or that real estate agent, or someone, rorting the system who's corrupt, and we'll jail them and we'll shoot them, or whatever. That appeal. Where the communists came along when he was explaining it, well, at the seventh plenary meeting of the Committee of the Communist International, blah blah, and he went on this long technical language and just lost everyone. It went over their heads, and I think we've got, sometimes you can have a little laugh at that word, laugh at it, but it was actually deadly serious at that time, and that's why it's important to understand it's why we need to actually use language that's appealing to the masses as well, but for them to also understand and think, oh yeah, we get that, and that way we can move forward from there through the collective.
I actually want to address a comment here. I think it's rather interesting. I'm not sure if he's coming off as a kind of contradictory tone here or what, but I really want to address this comment. And thank you for being here, Luke Buckmaster. Maybe the Nazis took power by appealing to national identity and conservative family values rather than talking about destroying these things. Now, capitalism does destroy what has been conservative family unions and family bonds and community bonds, things that conservatives say they valued. Capitalism and neoliberalism has absolutely destroyed these things. And the same was true. The same was true under Nazi Germany. They came off like they were appealing these things, but they were the force of destruction. They were the force of stopping the productive forces, which is the leaders of the communist movement and the labor movement. And we as communists and socialists, it's not like, I think it's kind of like a postmodernist idea that there is no truth. There is nothing good. It's simply everything's kind of in a wash. It's however you want to see it. That's not the case. That's not just because you believe and maybe revolutionary patriotism, even in imperialist countries like the United States, just because you love your neighbors and you love, the land that you're in the culture you're a part of, that is not the same as being a Nazi. And just because you want to improve the lives of people around you because of the people you love and the land you love, that's not Nazism. That's revolutionary patriotism. And that can be used to get people and build the masses and mobilize the masses, not towards Nazism and fascism, but towards socialism and towards building the material infrastructure to make it better for people. And you can also appeal to the national identity of oppressed people, of oppressed nations. You have the coalition around AMLO, the current progressive Mexican president. A lot of it had to do with pride in Mexico, which is an oppressed country. I would say revolutionary patriotism in the oppressor countries and even revolutionary nationalism in the oppressed countries. We can appeal to this sentiment of love of your community and wanting to do better for your community. And we can use it in a way that builds for positive growth in socialism. Comrade Fox, did you want to add on to that or address the comment?
It's interesting what Luke's raised there. Maybe the Nazis took power appealing to national identity and conservative family values rather than taking about destroying these things. And certainly, they had that appeal to them. They appealed on people's fears, but they also, I did a study with a few comrades once about fascism, but it has its own particularly unique identity. Fascists will use the identity of a particular country they were appealing to. In Germany, the Nazis used, these symbols and the Teutonic Order and all this mystical German heritage behind it. They wanted to actually have the new German Empire and etc. So they were trying to appeal to a particular time of Germany prior to World War One. This mystical German Empire was such a great place to be, etc. So and they do that. And for some ultra-conservative family values, certainly in that as well, they do play on that. But in the end, we all also know too, the end result that happens, it goes to completely flies in the face of it. And in fact, they wind up destroying those national identity and conservative family values. But in each country, fascism will certainly appeal to trying to appeal to the national character of respective countries, and that's what they try and do: play on people's fears, appeal to their natural and their concerns, and appeal to the national character and identity and values of the people.
Right now, I believe
No,
who read the last? You read the last one? All right, go ahead and go on to the next question.
Okay, well, this is an interesting one. Why did the Vice President of the United States speak in such a radical and pro-communist tone? I was, I was actually having a little bit of a think about that while you were answering that previous comment. I mean, was it radical at the time? And to some degree, it was, in a sense, because I think the role of the Communist Party right up into the Second World War, the influence of the communist parties in their respective countries played a huge influence in the labour movement, or union movement, and various other movements as well around the place. They were leading the charge of the United Front against fascism. So they had quite a large appeal. It's interesting, in Australia, by 1945, the Communist Party membership was the biggest ever. I think they had about 25,000. Don't quote me on that number, nationally at that time. And for a population of Australia at the time, that was huge. And they had leading positions in unions and other organisations as well. They had a lot of respect. So hence why I think probably why Henry Wallace was trying to appeal, using that type of language to appeal, bring everyone back into under their leadership. And obviously, book ideas, well, obviously, addressing the concerns of common working class, ordinary working people, working families, the working class themselves. Looking at this, well, we need to do this, and some great things are up ahead of us, and really look at that stability, that rural nation building, if you want to use that type of expression. Was the pro-communist tone? Yes, and certainly in some elements, yes. There's also appealing that we're now in alliance with the Soviet Union to fight Germany. So it certainly was a certain appeal to it, because I mean, if you used language going in there as completely anti-communist and reactionary, and that it will just say that then it will just enhance the division in US society at the time and around the Western world. At the end of the day, that could have actually been a fatal mistake and pitted people against each other. In fact, where we need to be united to defeat fascism. Over to you, Dustin.
Yes, I think, that's an interesting question. It seems really off-putting today to hear any American politician, even the so-called social democrats, the sheepdog imperialists, Sanders and Squad, and to get even near the praise of the Soviet Union. If I could just rattle off a few of the quotes here I underlined. Men and women cannot be really free until they have plenty to eat. Also, until freedom from want, we know that this revolution cannot stop until freedom from want has actually been attained. The peace must mean a better standard of living for the common man. And this is interesting, but there must be neither military nor economic imperialism. With internal monopoly pools under control, it will be possible for inventions to serve all people instead of only the few. And we cannot perpetuate economic warfare without planting the seeds of military warfare. So, I mean, there's a lot of those quotes I just said. I think it's interesting to note there is a particular deviation of capitalism, or a change in the capitalist nature after the fall of the Soviet Union and the advent of the neoliberalism, the globalist, the morbid, the extremely morbid, even the economy of death, the economy of destruction that has taken place in recent years. Probably the biggest time of growth in the world was under the Soviet Union, and when the United States and Europe were far more social democratic in their nature. And they were kept in line and made to be more social democratic in nature because they had to compete with the Soviet Union. And not only in competing with the Soviet Union, there was communist and socialist and revolutionary within those countries pushing for basic welfare programs, pushing for investment in industry. The Hoover Dam, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the United States. This was a completely different era where social democracy, had far bigger place. The neoliberalism now in the hellhole after the fall of the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union couldn't keep those things in place. I think with the rise of China, who has developed a more advanced economic system simply through planning, simply from having the ability, the economic system of neoliberalism, specifically in the United States, is so disgusting and so unstable and so ineffective that it can't even take enough money from its capitalist monopoly class to be able to invest in basic infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And simply on that criteria alone, China has developed a more advanced system that can take the money necessary to invest in its own infrastructure and to grow and continue. And not only does it grow and continue and not fall into oblivion like the United States empire is doing, it is advancing and is lifting millions of people out of poverty. I think that kind of answered the question.
Yeah.
I had a few good points. Let's see. Do you have any response to that before we move on?
No, I think we touched on quite a lot there. Actually, is also I'll refer everyone to page 170 when he's given the 4 duties of the People's Revolution as he sees them as of this day are the duty to reduce to the limit, the duty to transport as rapidly as possible to the line of battle, the duty to fight with all that is in us, and the duty to build a peace just and charitable and enduring. The fourth duty is that which inspires the other 3. So obviously, he's outlined some sort of plan there to achieve it. But also at the bottom paragraph is interesting when he's mentioned the communist terms. He goes, modern science, which is a byproduct and essential part of the People's Revolution, has made it technologically possible to see that all the people will all get enough to eat. And I thought that was that's obviously for us, it's a no-brainer, and we can achieve that through science. Thorough research, engineering, science. We've got the excellent ability to know how to do so. We just need the social, political, economic system to allow us then to expand on that and really come to our and reach our full limits there. So, yeah, full potential. I mean, not our limits. I believe it's unlimited, but yeah, our full potential.
So you read that question. I just wanted to touch on it. I wanted to talk about the dangers of Malthusianism and eco-fascism in the current time period. Essentially, the people who made their money off destroying the planet, this group of oil bankers, are now investing in the so-called green movement, whose main attack seems to be to tell China that it can't use the very technology that the Western imperialists came to power on and have already created this. So it's essentially this green branded imperialist austerity to the rest of the world. And it also is an attack against common working people in the imperialist countries, like in France. In the sake of green energy, instead of taxing the capitalists and forcing and taking money from the capitalists to build new green infrastructure to stop, the abysmal catastrophe approaching, which is economic collapse of climate change, instead of taking the money from the capitalists and putting into new resources, they taxed working people. They taxed the gas, which working people were forced to pay, which led to the Yellow Vest uprising. And you look at this thing right here, it's saying when technology is no longer under the control of the monopolies, we can use that technology to better serve the people. And I believe to an extent that's what China doing. I think that's what needs to happen all over the world. When a strong government with strong democratic ties and and working groups and institutions of the community can use capital and push it, develop technology to actually feed the people, to actually do what we need and reorient the economy that can do both things, that can serve the purposes of the people and lift up the economic well-being of the people and stop the inevitable, it seems like inevitable climate catastrophe from going on. Comrade Fox, if you want to touch on that issue.
Well, there's a bit to take in there as well. I mean, obviously, you're looking at Malthusianism and I've come across that myself, and seen people. There's just too many people, all consume too much, etc., and really, it's a very destructive. It actually equals fascism, as far as I care. It's a death ideology, and believing, it's basically leaving it up to those who to determine who lives and who dies, and making a better world. It was interesting. I think it was that Michael Moore film, The Planet of Humans. I mean, I've watched it. There's some interesting points in it, but also, too, my big concern was the Malthusian aspect involved in that message that comes across, and also, too, saying, Ability, there is no more hope. We've come to our limit. I mean, there's just really not provide a proper way forward. They're basically just saying, there's no hope, there's whatever. And I think, no, wrong. I mean, if the political economic system was socialism, we'd be actually, the sky would not even be our limit. We'd be going even further. Our potential wouldn't. It'd be huge to resolve a lot of issues and the contradictions of society there. But we're still under the system of capitalism, imperialism, where our limitations are there to be able to resolve these issues that arise as well. But to say there was too many people, well, I think there's just I think that's just a really that's a very serious concern for everyone to have, because we've seen if there's too many people, well, what's the ultimate if there's too many people for ideology that was allowed to prevail? And we've seen this before. We've talked about Nazi Germany, and we've seen what happens when we talk about now there's just too many people.
I think we're on the next question, which I believe we've actually answered already extensively. What class forces and international alliances promoted the speech? And that is the alliance of the Communist Party within the United States, the labor movement in the United States, the forced to be progressive Roosevelt section of the government, the Soviet Union, and the Chinese people. Those are the alliances. Comrade Fox?
Well, exactly, and I think you've just hit the nail right on the head. I mean, what are the class forces? And it was basically, once again, it was Communist Party policies around the world. It wasn't just one or two, but all of them to have a united front against fascism, the defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and of course, it's been outlined a lot of literature and communist literature there is about a united front. We are going to come across people who have different opinions about other issues, but we're all united around this particular cause. We have to fight for it. I mean, China is a classic example. How under the leadership of Chairman Mao and the Communist Party, how they had to form alliances, even had to form an alliance at one stage against Shanghai, with Shanghai Chek, to fight Imperial Japan. Obviously, and there would have been some fierce debate and discussions there as well within their party. There was fierce debates and discussions with the Australian Communist Party of that era. There would have fierce and intense debates within the American Communist Party or the Communist Party USA at that time around the world. Why, because I mean, there's obviously some sentiment. Why should we be aligned to certain people, etc.? But the importance is that time that we needed to defeat this. There was a line, in the UK, alliance with Winston Churchill's Conservatives to fight the fighting. That was the primary importance at that time. So at times, what classes International Alliances promoted this speech. I think that was vitally important, and that's why it had to be promoted and that throughout the world. And actually, I dare say it actually was promoted here to a certain degree in Australia as well, because we're still having a lot of British broadcasts, but by 1942 we're having a lot of American broadcasts coming across the radio as well, because obviously the US at the time took the lead as the leader of the Allied forces in the Pacific at the time. So we've obviously would have had transmissions from both Roosevelt and Wallace at the time.
Right on. If you want to take the next question.
Certainly. If Roosevelt had not died in 1945, and if Wallace had not been replaced by Harry Truman as vice president, how different would world history have been? I was having to think about that. Actually, I've watched some one or two documentaries about very similar. If Truman and I'll repeat that. If Roosevelt and Wallace had continued on, and obviously there was a big struggle within the Democratic Party at the time. There was a huge anti-communist force which did prevail after Roosevelt's death, as well, that took over, and hence why that was Truman. But would have been different. I think there certainly would have been. Yes, it would have been different from what our course of events did lead after, but not in the sense where there would have been a legislated or overthrow of capitalism in the US. I think there would have been an intense class struggle, the class struggle was intense, but it would have been intense in a different form, I think. And I think, it would have been a lot of pressure both on Wallace and Roosevelt to change their tone. If they happened to be successfully as president and vice president, there would have been a lot of pressure on the administration by many forces. You would have had the Pentagon, you would have the CIA, you would have had the Eastern establishment, etc. They would have been powering up one time. Could have possibly been a military coup in the United States. Might have been. Would have been of some sort of uprising. Might have been. We don't know. Can't really put it into it. It's a lot of what ifs and yes buts and etc. that we can throw into it. I think it would have been a different history into a certain degree, not the way we know in the course of the events ever since the end of the Second World War II. But certainly, yes, there would have been some difference for the better. I can't really say. At the moment, as I said, I think the struggle in the United States. I could say there, and don't correct me if I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I think actually the class war, there would have been the antagonisms in the United States would have been sharpened a lot earlier. It would have come to actually a pinnacle or to a point of crisis a lot earlier than what we see than what we're seeing now.
This is an interesting question. I think you correctly pointed out. Just look at the analysis of politicians are superstructure, and superstructure has a base who is actually in power. The Communist Party was nowhere close to coming to power. Even the capitalists did fear it. I don't think they had the power to take it. And I think you were right in saying maybe there would have been a coup or something like that. Those capitalist forces, the democracy in the United States or any capitalist country is really only an illusion, because if the power of the capitalists and the bourgeoisie is challenged, they will carry out open coups or resort to fascism to deal with that threat. It's interesting. I think in this part, I thought it was particularly interesting where on page 173, he talks about we must be prepared for worst kind of fifth column work in Latin America, much of it operating through the agency of government which the United States is at peace at. So he's essentially saying that Nazis are infiltrating governments in Latin America. This is interesting because they were against the Nazis. Well, the U.S., like companies like Ford, I think Helen pointed this out earlier, that Ford backed the Nazis.
So did Standard Oil.
Yes, so did Standard Oil. Even GMC, I know I'm a guy who drives Chevys. Even GMC was building stuff for the Nazis. But Hitler, I still don't like forward because Hitler was outright back in the Nazi. It's kind of a joke here in the South. But what I'm getting at is the U.S. funded the Nazis before World War II. And then the Communist Union, the Soviet Union, the United States, and communists in the United States and communists around the world led this coalition to defeat the Nazis. And then the U.S. immediately started backing Nazis again. Who did they put in the power in Chile, where a lot of Nazis went to? They put Pinochet in the power. As soon as the capitalist imperialist in the United States no longer had the threat of fascism, they became the world's worst enemy. They became the fascists of our day. And I still believe we need a united front or a popular front against imperialism led by the United States. They essentially, with the power, now being with all the industry destroyed, with German industry being destroyed, with Japanese industry being destroyed, with much of Europe being destroyed, the U.S. became the dominant power after World War after World War II. And with this new power, they no longer needed the labor movement. They no longer needed the Communist Party. And what did they carry out in the 1950s? Disgusting, repressive, McCarthyist era torture and attack on the working people and the working people's organizations in the United States. They essentially became the state violence and the terror that Henry Wallace was talking against the Nazis, and they became the enemy that they defeated. Comrade Fox?
Yep. Well, it's in 2 years, because I mentioned it. I would recommend people refer to page 173 on that. We must special. I like where it says now, the last paragraph where it says we must be especially prepared to offer the fifth columns in the United States who will try to sabotage not merely our war material plants, but even more important, infinitely more important our minds. And he might have been making reference to those elements we've just been talking about. And so it certainly, I think history would have been slightly different for what we know it as well. And you quite rightly point that capitalism can be illusion of democracy. If there was a coup there, they would have done it under the reactionary elements there of the capitalist class. All throughout the whole capitalist class, we've been saying we're trying to reinstate the Bill of Rights again, the American Constitution. They would have used all sorts of breaches. And interesting, you mentioned Chile too. Just on that, I don't want to go off track, but if you look at the history of the Chilean military, it was actually the Prussian influence, not Russian. Prussian influence on the German military, and right up to even recently, you see the uniforms, or even now, even their parade uniforms and that, it looks like the Weimar, not the Weimar republics, but the Second and Third Reich type armies, and so they had a very big influence on there as well. So you could see that it wasn't just their military parades and their tactics, but also the ideology as well would have been in there as well.
I don't want to detract from the intentions. No. I don't want to. I've been a little bit doom and gloom through this. I don't want to get away from the positive core of this speech. There's a lot of progressive ideas in this. The ideas that technology can advance and help the people. The idea that we can evolve as a society, that we can end imperialism. These are absolutely beautiful things that we hold as socialists and communists and, leaders of oppressed groups hold. We should hold these ideas, and there is room for alliances. And I don't want to detract from the question, the positive nature of this question. If Wallace could have, been put in the power somehow, some turn of events had put Wallace in the power, or I think it's kind of an idealistic question, but I'll state an idealistic answer. If the ideas of Henry Wallace would somehow materially be put in the power, if the base could have somehow been generated to put that superstructure in the power, how would it have looked different? And the answer is the United States would not have immediately started funding Nazis in West Germany to fight against East Germany. The United States would not have entered the war in Korea. The United States would not have entered the war in Vietnam. If we could have somehow, I don't see how we could have kicked the imperialists out of power. I think Roosevelt, is always seen as this like great savior from, liberals and progressives. But in reality, he was the great savior for capitalism. He moved to the left and, did wonderful things. But it was ultimately a way of strengthening the U.S. empire to then crush the Soviet Union and then implement their own fascistic policies. I went totally from I'm not trying to be gloom and doom to, to there was some positive shit in this to, yeah, they're actually against it. What are your thoughts on, I rose a lot there, comrade. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think you've been totally doom and gloom. Look, with anything, even for example, it was a communist leader came out putting a speech out. You'd always pick out little waltz and things, and then we have that debate that we're trying to do. But I think we do need to. And look, this is an inspiring speech. Look at the era of the time, right? Nazi Germany had all control of most of Europe. It was in the Soviet Union, talking about that the final offensive. Wallace was actually referring to another offensive by the Nazis that time. Then, okay, we know what that was, Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad. So, and if he won that, the Nazis won that, it would have just been, there would have been a complete collapse of the Soviet Union, but also the complete collapse of all the Allied forces, what's left of them around the world. So it was a fight to the death, that battle. So, it wasn't sorry. It was actually calling on every ordinary people, we need to get into line now and get behind this and get behind the war effort and defeat this monster. And which was basically a very important thing to do at the time. And look, let's face it, without even something like this, even without Roosevelt, Roosevelt and Wallace, what we would understand, if events could have been turned out not for the better for humanity even afterwards. Look, we still had a lot of things to do. But there was the civil rights movement, the trade union movement, all these certain things that we actually managed to actually enjoy, what left to enjoy. But it was certainly without that. And if Nazi Germany won, you just imagine the consequences of the whole entire planet at that time. And basically, that's what needed to happen. It was inspiring. Yes, can we pick faults out of this speech? We certainly can. There's no doubt about it. It was condescending, yes, and all these other things. But at the same time, we needed to aspire to everybody, not just like one group of people, to defeat this monstrous war machine at the time.
Comrade, if you want to take the last question.
Certainly
didn't you do? Did you do the Roosevelt question? Okay, I'll take the last question. Sorry.
Yeah.
My bad, comrade. Right. Is it naive to downplay the role of the individual in history? I don't think it's. This is talking about base and superstructure, which we're getting into. People and leaders exist because the political economic conditions at the time allow them and create them, and is ultimately the masses that create history. Now, that said, once these powerful individuals are put in the power, it is true that the superstructure has an effect on society. Their basic, personality quirks, their preferences can have a huge effect on history. But it was the political economic conditions, which are ultimately flow from the masses of the people, that made that possible. And it's, you can't get one too far one way or the other. This is a big, I'm a historian. I took many history classes. I was studying to be a historian. There is this debate. There seems to be these two schools of history. Is it, these big figures that create history, or is it the masses? It's definitely the masses, but these figures that are in power do have some effect over history. Comrade Fox?
Yeah. And I think actually you mentioned about superstructure and economic base. I'm just going to hold that up to the camera while you were talking. That's what Dust was referring to. So you have the economic base, which determines the superstructure, which will influence the economic base. Now, what makes up your superstructure? Well, I wrote in Parliament, courts, police, military, media, education even, and there's many others there. And obviously the economic basis is your capitalist modes and the means of production, or imperialist modes as well. So that's what it determines. So for those of you who are listening, this is the society we live in now. So it's vitally important to always keep in mind it's the economic base that determines the superstructure, which will influence the economic base. And most important, what's primary? But it's always the economic base that yes, we need to tackle the superstructure, but we also need to change the economic base. You can't just change one and not change the other. But both have got to be changed. And that's what it means by revolution, the step way forward. Good classic examples when we've had federal elections and state government and all, state, federal, local elections here. And I'll be at union meetings or trade hall meetings, and we're talking about elections and that, what the results. And I said you have to do more than just change the government. You have to change the system, and that's an important thing to always keep in our mind. And just to make little subtle little changes, we need to actually change the whole entire system. That has to happen, because reality is, in the end of the day, even if we get some great people in Parliament here in Australia, for example, they're going to be under so much pressure and that not to force any major change, to put in place many changes that will benefit working people. So that's why it's widely at the point. And at the same time, we need to change the economic basis as well. So it's quite a lot of work to do, but how it's going to play out in our respective countries, I don't know. It's work that out ourselves and do that ourselves. But I like the question, is it naive to downplay the role of the individual in history? And of course it is naive to just downplay the role. I mean, yes, the masses make history. Let's not let's not get that. But at the same time, the individual does play an important role and played some good leadership roles as well, and some good organisation role as well. Like the greats. I mean, Lenin in the Bolshevik Revolution, even lead up to it and after, he played a very significant role there and all this. Yes, the masses made history there, but it was under his leadership and ability, and the Bolsheviks, their ability to give the masses a way forward. China, and with under Chairman Mao. I mean, the fact is, at the end of the day, he led a successful revolution and overthrew the feudal order. And come 1949, yes, it was the sick man of Asia, but from under his leadership, it set the stepping stone to where China is now, the more powerful nation, vice versa. So, I think people should understand. Don't downplay the role of the individual. I think it's got to be, but don't overemphasize the role of the individual either. It's got to be through proper scientific dialogue and quality. It's that we also always keep in the mind the masses make history, but yeah, there is an important role for the individual.
Right on. We're getting close to the 2-hour mark. I believe we'll both go into summation, and then we have a few announcements after that. I think there is very beautiful things in this speech. And this speech was made to appeal to elements within the American population, made to appeal with religious institution, workers, religious people, communists within the United States, progressives within the United States. And this is an anti-imperialist speech from an American vice president. And that has huge historical significance. An anti-racist speech that doesn't think the people of Latin America and Asia. I like how he didn't even mention Africa, but we won't get into that. He didn't even mention Africa, and African people made a huge contribution to defeating the Nazis in Africa. And it was actually the Gaddafi's people of the people who Gaddafi came from, and the Green Revolution, backed a lot of these people that fought against Hitler and put, Gaddafi, the partly Pan-African, partly Pan-Arab socialist, into power. I think he started out I'm getting into obscure history, but he started out more Pan-Arab and eventually got more Pan-African. But it was that fight against World War II and leaders against not only that, that pushed Gaddafi and African socialism, which, the first president, the first black president of the United States, was part of destroying, or was used as the face of the empire to destroy African socialism. But there is what I'm getting to say, if I got to put down a positive line to end this show, there is revolutionary traditions of anti-imperialism, of camaraderie in the United States that we today can build in, seek out, not cancel our neighbors, not attack our neighbors, but find the positive, revolutionary, humanitarian roots of our working class brothers and sisters of various race, colors, and creeds to build the power necessary to create a new America that will build socialism free of imperialism and free of exploitation. Comrade Fox.
Yeah, look, I mean, just to add on to that too. I mean, look at it. During that time, 1942, I mentioned Prime Minister John Curtin, who became Prime Minister at the time after a vote of no confidence by 1 or 2 independents in our federal parliament. I mean, we were about to be actually close to selling out the whole country to Imperial Japan. And John Curtin gave some very famous speeches about inspiring the Australian people, and he appealed to the Australian people. And you could see it was also there was a struggle to have our own identity, our own control of our own affairs, away from then Britain, who was still our global dominant power on here in Australia. We wanted to have our own traditions, our own way of moving forward in the world. And he actually had that right up to that day he died. He was still in office, and just before the ending of the Second World War, he died of a heart attack. But I've heard a few theories around the place later that he was murdered, or he was poisoned or something like that. Look, I don't want to get in that discussion now, but I mean that was important, and he held that as a certain ideal that's been going for us in Australia. That started off in the Goldfields rebellions, even before then. With the clash between various convicts and oppressed peoples in this country, for the first peoples fighting against a foreign dominant power. And it's also too, as I said, the Goldfields rebellions there, right up through to now, our own significant way forward, our own control of our own affairs. And I think that's something vitally important to understand that where it came from. So World War II certainly enhanced that we wanted to actually get control of our own affairs, because we're all going to get left out high and dry. At that time, I mean, Singapore fell and all that, and we were told we had to be, oh no, we've got to defend British imperial interests. Oh no, we'll sell out the rest of this country land. We'll have a Brisbane line just north of Brisbane, where the Maroochy River is, all the way around a little narrow strip of the coast, right around Adelaide. We'll still be occupied by us, but we'll be a little quasi, little Vichy, little fascist state. But so that's what was going to hit for Australia at that time. And I think anyone that you actually come across out there that spooks nationalism, basically these Nazi groups and everyone else that is reactionary and everyone else, I just want to point that out to them. That was people on their side that were going to sell us out completely like that, and it would have turned the course, changed the affairs in the world. So Australia would have been dominated by Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany and fascist Italy as well. So just to always keep that in the back of your minds. It's certainly a rich history. But yes, Australia got behind the leadership of John Curtin. Yes, he tied us to the US alliance. And the Pacific reason was we were direct under threat. Our Navy was depleted. Forces were depleted and everything else. We needed to actually have a stronger ally to step in to give us a hand at that time. How events panned out afterwards, yes, we know that. And we're well aware of it. But that's a continual struggle that we must continue on so we can get control back over our own affairs again. Oh, I'll leave it at that. I'll start to get a bit passionate about that, but I just want to have a swipe at the far right and the right, and anyone just who thinks, who loves imperialism. Mm-hmm.
Right on. Let's see, a few announcements. Next week on Working Class Revolt, we're going to be changing the time period to, I believe, what did I say, 5? Or
Yeah,
no, or
7 a.m. time. Oh, my time. Yeah. Sorry.
okay, 11 minus 6, 5. Okay, yeah, we're going to be going live on the 22nd at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to be having a comrade who lives in Germany. I don't want to say his name because I don't know what he's going to want to go by, but we're going to have a comrade who lives in Germany, is part of the KPD, the Communist Party of Germany, and is originally from Mexico. So we're going to get an insight on both the communist movement in Germany as well as the immigrant experience in Germany, and that's going to be 5 o'clock on the 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern on the 22nd. And then a very important announcement on the 29th. The Center for Political Innovation is going to have a web conference, and that web conference is going to feature the award-winning author, Dan Kovalik, who is going to give a pre-recorded speech about his new book, Cancel This Book, The Progressive Case Against Cancel Culture. This is going to be going live. We usually have our conferences around 7 p.m. Please look for updates that might change, but it's usually 7 p.m. It'll be on the 29th. We're going to have award-winning author Dan Kovalik. We're also going to have very popular YouTuber Peter Coffin speak, and I will be chairing that meeting. And we will also have our very wonderful, strong, and revolutionary friend from Telly Jaguar, Ernesto Ayala, will be speaking that as well against the attacks that have been done against the strong Chicano revolutionary tradition in Aslan, and its attack by the synthetic left and against the anti-materialist left. He'll be speaking out against that attack around that very rich revolutionary tradition that he is a part of. Comrade Fox, any last notes before we say goodnight to everybody?
Yep, look, to all the Australian comrades and also New Zealand ones out there, big shout out to all of you as well. Look, I would highly recommend jump on the board the Centre of Political Innovation conferences. Obviously, just you can find them through Facebook or through their website. Just Google it. It'll obviously you might be involved in that as well. Obviously, we're trying to get something going here in Australia, and I want to announce myself and Helen Woolley, who's been watching this tonight. We've started off on the study book for Australia. We're studying at this, and we're calling ourselves We Are Builders Australia. We're studying this, and we will be going live at 7 o'clock this Thursday. I forget the date. What's today? Forget the date. What's the date this Thursday again? I missed it. It's the 15th.
Thursday's the 20th.
Yeah, so Thursday the 20th. 7 p.m. our time, Australian Eastern Standard Time. If you'd actually like to be involved, by any means, feel free to send me a Facebook message. I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible, and we'll send the link. We'll do it. We'll use the live stream or StreamYard. That one's because we can have a whole lot of more people involved as well, and I could send the link to you. Just be advised too. Don't look if you want to invite other people. Let us know first, and because we don't want to just jam pack it up. I think I've got a limited number, but two. Secondly, we just got to make sure we don't want anyone unwarranted people to cause any disruption either. So just always keep that back in your mind. But looking forward to that once again. And I'm also going to be looking forward to this CPI web conference the 29th as well. Otherwise, I will see everyone 7 o'clock a.m. next Sunday. That'd be the 23rd for the next Working Class Revolt, Australian Eastern Standard Time.
And that is 5 p.m. Eastern New York time. In the United States. Repeat after me, comrade. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.